So Candace Owens has become a very well-known and outspoken personality, and in recent times has been seen to be peddling very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic ideas. And the irony of it is that she had been hired previously, directly and indirectly, by two Orthodox Jews, both Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager. Now, I know they both don't own their companies or organizations entirely, but they are very involved in the founding and setting up of it. And she has or had a very good relationship with Dennis Prager. Now, for a long time, I have no doubt that Dennis has been pushed and asked about the fact that she's been coming up with these more and more anti-Israel and, frankly, anti-Semitic tropes. And it's very, very sad to see this happening, really. And this, unfortunately, is the reality of the words that she's saying. And Dennis decided that he had to go public and go through the things that she said and explain publicly why he strongly disagrees and laments it. He did respond to her privately first, wanted to get her response privately and talk to her privately, but after a few weeks of not much communication, he decided to publish what he said publicly. And I want to read to you the correspondence he had and then what he actually sent to her and what he's now published, going through the claims that she makes, the things she says, and explaining why they are so destructive. It really is worth listening to. It's not this is not going to be a 5-minute video, but I think it's really important to listen to and understand. So this is what he has published. He said, on September the 4th, 2024, I sent this letter to Candace Owens regarding many comments she has made about Jews, Zionism, and Israel. I've known Candace for about as long as she has been in public life. She began her podcasting at Prager in 2019 and left in 2021. She left on very good terms. To this day, she often speaks of her respect and love for Marissa Street, CEO of PragerU, and me. Marissa, by the way, is also Jewish. Within hours of receiving my letter, Candace replied, quote, I deeply appreciate this email and I will respond to it thoroughly. Please know that I respect you tremendously, and it is difficult for me to reconcile how I feel about you and Marissa and the amazing way in which I was treated by you both, and my new feelings and understanding about Zionism. Please give me a bit of time to respond to all of your points. You can always reach out to me, and no matter which side of this or any political debate we wind up on, my love and respect for you and Marissa and your treatment of me will never be swayed. And it sounds really genuine, and I think it is. Dennis continued, as it happens, more than 2 weeks later, Candace has not responded to the letter. Given the number of subjects covered, the letter's length, and Candace's busy family life and career, I did not expect her to. I sent it to Candace to give her the chance to respond, and because I did not want her to first see it when it went public. Last week, after not hearing from her, I emailed Candace that I would be publishing the letter. We then spoke on the phone. She briefly explained why she hadn't been able to respond in writing, and she in no way objected to my making the letter public. I wish I did not have to write this letter, but Candace has said many things that need to be answered. The primary reasons I have not spoken out sooner are that I needed to become fully acquainted with all or nearly all the things she has said about Jews, Zionism, and Israel, make sure I quoted her accurately, and that I never did so out of context. That was time-consuming work. And by the way, I take my hat off to Dennis for doing that, for actually going thoroughly into the words she has said, and that's why what you're about to listen to is so comprehensive, analytical, and clear. Something that's truly a great work of Dennis's. And he says at the end, I ask anyone who has been influenced by Candace with regard to Jews, Israel, and Zionism, make the effort to read, or in this case, listen to this entire letter. If you care about the truth, I believe you have a moral obligation to do so. And now I'm going to read it to you. Dear Candace, like you were with Kanye West, I have been under great pressure to condemn you for what many see as your growing anti-Semitism. Because I wanted to reach out to you privately before I say anything publicly, I've devoted a lot of time to listening to your relevant podcast episodes and your comments in debates and conversations with other people. If you think, based on my responses here, I've missed anything relevant, please let me know. I want to take into account and do so, everything into account, and do so in full context. Number 1, Israel was founded by frankists masquerading as Jews. That's what she says. You say the nation of Israel was established by some frankists. I taught Jewish history at Brooklyn College and never heard or read such a thing. And even if there were any truth to it, It in no way explains the founding of Israel. For 2,000 years, as part of daily ritual prayers, Jews prayed 3 times a day to be able to return to their homeland, Israel. That, plus the world witnessing what happens when Jews have no homeland, centuries of pogroms, massacres and expulsions, which inspired Theodor Herzl to organise the Jews' return to Israel, Zionism in the late 19th century, culminating in the Holocaust, is what led to the re-establishment of the Jewish state. That Herzl came from the same general region as did Jacob Frank, who predated Herzl by about 150 years, a region with millions of Jews who were not Frankists, and therefore must have been a Frankist, seemed like a pretty big leap. 2. Alleged Frankists, who were in fact ethnic Jews, were responsible for missing and presumably murdered Christian children around Passover time. You say Catholics and Christians were going missing on Passover, then they would find bodies across Europe, and they were able to trace them back to Jews. They weren't Jews, okay? It was the Frankists. And just as Leo Frank killed Mary Fagan on Passover back in 1913 or 1914, it was done on Passover for a reason. The Frankist cult, which masquerades behind Jews, still participates in this bleep to this day. Why would you want, as a small nation that is the size of New Jersey, the paedophiles to flee there? Therefore, Israel was founded to be a haven for pedophiles, who furthermore engage in slaughtering Christians as part of a satanic ritual. That is as close to a medieval libel of Jews as butchers of Christian children to use their blood for baking Passover matzah, as I've heard in my lifetime. You mock the idea that this is another blood libel, but that is what it is. And given how many Jews were massacred, often tortured to death, because of it, Jews have good reason to loathe it. You cite and deem as credible the 2 modern instances of the blood libel against Jews. Most people don't know. They think that the nation of Israel, she says, most people don't know. They think the nation of Israel was established because of World War II. No, there was a lot of going on up to that. Learn about the Damascus Affair of 1840. Learn about what happened to Esther Solimosi in Austria in 1880. There are Christians who kept on going missing on holidays, and the entire Christian world rose up and began publicising, trying to point to what they believed to be a satanic cult. Of course, all of that's been erased. Most Christians don't know this. Candace continues, in 1840 in Damascus, Syrian Jews were charged with butchering Capuchin Friar Thomas, an Italian monk living in Damascus. The Capuchins in Damascus spread the charge, which resulted in 63 Jewish children being abducted from their families to force the families to divulge the location of the friar's blood. And a Jewish barber named Solomon Negrin was arbitrarily arrested and tortured until a confession was extorted from him. Under torture, Negrin said that 7 Jews killed the monk in the house of David Harari. The 7 men were subsequently arrested and also tortured. 2 of them died under torture. The other blood libel you cite as credible took place in Austria-Hungary in 1882. Jews were accused of murdering and beheading a 14-year-old Catholic girl named Esther Solimosi. A girl's body was found on the bank of the Tisza River, but though the body was dressed in Esther's clothes, it was not Esther, and if it was, it proved the charges to be libelous. There was no injury to her neck. Nevertheless, members of the local Jewish community were accused of having killed Esther for ritual purposes, as it happened right before Passover. Jews, according to the centuries-old charge, used Christians' blood to bake matzah, the unleavened Passover bread. Eventually, after 15 months of investigation, the Hungarian highest court, in a unanimous verdict, acquitted of all the accused. You repeat this libel of anti-Christian crimes committed by Jews in another podcast. There's a lot behind my refusal, my absolute refusal to bend the knee to Israel, she says, as many American politicians have done. There's too much I've learned about their, Israel, Jews, history, about what was done to Christians, which they're alleging now is blood libel. That none of that's real. It didn't happen. Well, Candace, it didn't happen, and repeating it does terrible harm. It is painful for me to know that the Candace I have known would say such things. 3. She says Israel is not our ally. You say you are over the idea that Israel is our ally. If another person says that stupid statement, I'm going to personally punch you in the face. You then add the punch in the face comment was a joke, but nothing else was meant as a joke. The joke conveyed your contempt for anyone who says such a thing. I am one of those, and I am hardly an outlier in this regard. American administrations, Democrat and Republican, since Harry Truman saw Israel as America's greatest ally in the Middle East, and one of its greatest allies in the world. Only the Biden administration has begun to regard Israel differently. In every year for which I could find data, 2005 to 2021, Israel voted with America at the United Nations more often than any other country in the world. and no country has supplied the US with more intelligence or as much arms innovation as has Israel. I'll cite an example from 1986. The New York Times quoted retired Air Force Intelligence General George Keegan as praising Israeli assistance in discovering Soviet Air Force capabilities, new weapons, electronics, and jamming devices. I could not have procured the intelligence with 5 CIAs. The ability of the US Air Force in particular, and the Army in general, to defend whatever position it has in NATO owes more to the Israeli intelligence input than it does any other single source of intelligence, be it satellite reconnaissance, be it technology intercept, or what have you. The Iron Dome has become a critical part of the US Army's defense system. It is produced in America, but its technology was invented in Israel. Bill Gates, whom I do not like, but who knows the tech industry, said in 2006 that the innovation going on in Israel is critical to the future of the technology business. Mike Huckabee, another conservative Christian who supports Israel, in your view, if I understand you correctly, foolishly and counter to Christian values, wrote in the conservative Washington Examiner, quote, "Modern Israel has given us the mobile phone, drip irrigation system, the USB thumb drive, many of the most effective cancer-killing drugs in use, voicemail, video on demand, and cherry tomatoes. America's relationship with Israel is not merely organizational, it's organic. Israel is a mirror image of America in its commitment to religious liberty, education, women's rights, free speech, democratic governments, and free market capitalism. Women have also equal access to education and workplace opportunities. While a Jewish state, Israel also protects all religious shrines and provides Christians, Muslims, and Jews universal access to all religious sites. How many churches or synagogues are equally protected by the Syrians or the Iranians?" Number 4. She says the USS Liberty, American pedophiles in Israel, etc., etc., mentions Israel's real and alleged bad actions, specifically Israel's attack on the USS Liberty during the Six-Day War in 1967, the American pedophiles who have found refuge in Israel, and the recent charges of abuse of Palestinian prisoners. Terrible mistakes happen in every war. A few months ago, Israeli troops mistakenly killed 3 of their own hostages in Gaza, for example, and for a long time I thought the Israeli attack on the Liberty may have been one. But I am persuaded that the strike on the Liberty was probably deliberate. For reasons I do not understand and wish I did, both the American and Israeli governments covered it up at the time and have never since explained why it happened. If everything said about the attack on the Liberty is true, that attack seems to me to have been criminal. Israel, in my view, has also been wrong in the extraditing any of the accused American Jewish pedophiles living in Israel. I should explain, however, why that is. It has nothing to do with pedophilia. Israel would not extradite any Jew to any country for any crime. The reason is history. Corrupt authorities often demanded that Jewish communities hand over innocent Jews on trumped-up charges, and if they did, those Jews would often be tortured into confessing some crime and then be executed. This history in no way justifies Israel not extraditing Jews to law-based countries like the United States, but history has effects, and as I said, it is not specific to pedophiles. Regarding the alleged abuse of some Palestinian prisoners, if true, it is criminal. It is important to note, however, that, like with abuses committed by our soldiers at Abu Ghraib, it was Israeli whistleblowers who informed the world of the abuse. In the words of a CNN headline, Israeli whistleblowers detail abuse of Palestinian in shadowy detention center. Contrast the Israeli whistleblowers with the sharing of photos and videos of October 7th by Hamas terrorists with fellow Palestinians. Are there any Palestinians' voices who have objected to what was done that day, or what has been done during 75 years of Palestinian terror? Is there one Palestinian official who has said about Palestinian terror what Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant just said about the alleged abuse of Palestinian prisoners? That the investigation into the soldiers' conduct must be allowed to continue because, quote, even in times of anger, the law applies to everyone? Publicly, how you, Candace, judge Israel is exactly how the anti-American left judges America. Focus on everything bad thing America has done without putting any of it into moral perspective. America has been an extraordinarily decent nation that has done many indecent things. So too, Israel has been an extraordinarily decent nation that has done some indecent things. If we knew every detail of the history of every country we consider decent, I suspect we'd find the same is true for all of them. 5. You regularly refer to the Zionist media. What does that term mean? Does it mean media that believe Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish country? That is, after all, what Zionist means. Nothing more and nothing less. Until the day after the October 7th massacres, only 2 groups regularly used the term Zionist media. Anti-Semites, who use Zionist as a synonym for Jewish, and Arab and Muslim countries and groups that seek Israel's destruction. 6. Israel has a stranglehold on dialogue in America, she says. That is so obviously untrue as to qualify, I regret to say, as a lie. I'm not accusing you of lying because I think you believe it. So let me ask you, does Israel have a stranglehold on dialogue in academia? If there is a stranglehold on dialogue in America's universities and increasingly in high schools, it comes from anti-Israel sources. It is much more dangerous for one's career and reputation for a professor to speak out on behalf of Israel than to attack it. Does Israel have a stranglehold on dialogue in American media? Other than the Wall Street Journal editorial page, virtually all mainstream media in America loathe Israel's prime minister as much as they hate Donald Trump, and they vigorously oppose Israel's war against Hamas. Given that the media and academia are the primary shapers of American opinion, where exactly does Israel have a stranglehold on dialogue in America? Then she talks about Leo Frank murdered Mary Fagan. You frequently state, he says. Now, before I continue, this is quite a long one. So actually the frankist thing, I think I'm going to put the link in the video description for you to have a look at the Frank one, because it's quite a fringe discussion, which you kind of need quite a bit of background knowledge on to understand. But Dennis does a lengthy debunking of her words there. So I'll leave that one for you to look up online, or I'll put it in the comment section. Number 8. The ADL was founded by protecting and defending a pedophile. That's what she says. It is true that the ADL was founded after Leo Frank, a Jew who was lynched in Georgia. I'm no fan of the ADL, but just about every Jew in 1913 America, seeing the anti-Semitic mobs and seeing a Jew lynched, understood that a Jewish anti-defamation organization needed to be formed. You are certain that Leo Frank murdered the girl, and that he was therefore yet another Jewish pedophile. One in generations of frankist pedophiles, you say, though I can find no evidence that Leo Frank was in any way involved in a cult that began in Europe more than a century before his birth in America. And the ADL was founded essentially to defend Jewish pedophiles. That in and of itself is a remarkably dark, even hateful view, based on nothing that I can find, and a new one in the annals of anti-Jewish charges. A clear source or set of sources for this allegation would be helpful. Without one, what are people to think about such a charge? I say that as a frequent critic of the ADL, which, especially in the last decade, has veered so far to the left, as I have said on my radio show, it may have fostered more anti-Semitism than it has actually fought. Nevertheless, the charge that it was founded to protect Jewish pedophiles is without any foundation that I have not seen you provide. Morally indefensible, he said. Number 9. She says Israel was founded in order to be a safe haven for pedophiles. You say I can't support the state of Israel. There's a ton of reasons why, but chief among them is that there always seems to be this cover-up for pedophilia. You also say, I should not be the only one calling out how many times Zionists defend pedophiles and criminals. This is not normal, okay? The nation of Israel may have been established by some frankists. It's looking like Theodor Herzl's family was from the exact same area in Moravia and in Bohemia where the Frankist cult was founded. There are millions of Jews scattered around the part of... Dennis is saying, there are millions of Jews scattered around that part of Eastern Europe in Herzl's time. How do you connect him to the Frankist cult, which at best was a tiny minority, and then assert that his advocacy of a homeland for Jews in their ancient homeland resulted in a state founded by people devoted to a satanic cult involved in incest and ritual sex with children? Such a defamatory allegation should be presented with very strong evidence. May have been doesn't qualify as such. Absolutely right. Number 10. America is occupied by Israel. Your summary. America is occupied by Israel. If you speak about Israel, you have to say you don't want to be killed, and if anything happens to me, blame the Zionists. Your words, quote, basically any person who speaks about Israel has to basically say a statement that's like, I don't want to get killed. That is not normal, okay? That people have to think about their security. The way you get comfortable with it is your luck. Is your luck. Well, they shot JFK in an open car. If they want to, they're going to get me. That's not a normal process to have. We don't have that about any other country in the world except for the one that, took over ours. And that's the truth, okay? We are an occupied nation. I just want to be clear. Anything happens to me, blame the Zionists. 1000% blame the Zionists. Dennis says, this was only one of the times you refer to America as being occupied by Israel. On another, you say, your nation is being held hostage by a foreign power, Israel. The notion that people who criticize Israel essentially risk their lives is simply untrue. The internet is flooded with anti-Israel rhetoric. Academia is dominated by professors who are virulently anti-Israel. Has one individual been dealt with violently, let alone killed? Ironically, there is a group about whom expressing some strong criticism means risking your life. Muslims. But you never mention that. You acknowledge that you don't talk about Islam, which is strange. If you care about mass killing, especially of Christians, the only group killing a large number of Christians today is Muslims. 11. Zionism and antisemitism. Recently, you devoted nearly 2 hours depicting Zionism once again as an evil movement. It is completely fair to say that you are an anti-Zionist. What is anti-Zionism? 40 years ago, I co-authored Why the Jews, a book explaining antisemitism. It contains a chapter equating anti-Zionism with antisemitism. The gist of my argument then and ever since is simple. Zionism is the name of a movement to re-establish a Jewish state in the land of Israel. Therefore, anti-Zionism means opposition to Israel's existence as a Jewish nation. Of the world's more than 200 countries, the anti-Zionist regards only one as unworthy of existence, the Jewish one. To deny that this is anti-Jewish is like saying, with the exception of Italy, every country in the world is legitimate. But do not accuse me of being anti-Italian. After all, I like many Italians and much Italian culture. Why don't anti-Zionists devote their energy to delegitimizing Pakistan? There was an Israel from 1020 BC to 586 BC, and from 516 BC to 70 AD. But there was never a Pakistan until it was created in 1947 to 48, the same year Israel was established. Pakistan was wrenched from India to create a Muslim state. According to the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, the creation of Pakistan resulted in 14 million refugees, Hindus fleeing Pakistan and Muslims fleeing India. Assuming a 50-50 split, the creation of Pakistan produced about 7 million Hindu refugees, at least 10 times the number of Arab refugees that resulted from the war surrounding Israel's creation. And were it not for the Arab rejection of Israel's creation and its existence within any borders, and the subsequent Arab invasion, there would have been no Arab refugees at all. As regards death, such a great point. As regards death, the highest estimate of Arab deaths during the 1948 war, following the partition plan of Palestine, is 10,000. The number of deaths that resulted from the creation of Pakistan is around 1 million. In addition, according to the Indian government, at least 86,000 women were raped. Most historians believe the true number to be far higher. The number of women raped when Israel was established is close to 0. The highest estimate was 12. It is for those reasons that people accuse anti-Zionists of being anti-Semites. Not because they criticize Israel, but because they delegitimize Israel, and only Israel. Number 12, saying that Stalin was a Jew. You say everybody knows that Stalin was Jewish. Americans don't know this. Well, my field of study in graduate school at the Russian Institute of Columbia University's School of International Affairs was the Soviet Union and communism. So Dennis is the perfect person to respond to this. With all I read about Stalin, it was never hinted that Stalin bon Loseb Bessarionis I can't even pronounce this, a thoroughly Georgian name, was a Jew. Moreover, I can assure you that if anyone in Russia thought he was a Jew, his numerous opponents would surely have repeatedly noted that in order to smear him. There were 5 possible successors to head the Soviet Communist Party and thereby head the Soviet Union, after Lenin's death in 1924. Of the 5, 3 were born Jews: Kamenev, Zinoviev, and Trotsky. Though they had nothing to do with Jews and never referred to themselves as Jews, everyone knew they were born Jews, but not Stalin. In fact, Stalin had attended the Tiflis theological seminary where he studied in order to become a priest of the Orthodox Church. He of course left the ceremony when he adopted Marxism as his religion. Why would you say Stalin was a Jew? That is precisely the sort of thing that makes people think you harbour anti-Jewish views. If I said Stalin, a thug and mass murderer, was a Christian, which at least he once was, people would assume I harboured anti-Christian views. That I mentioned his being Christian in order to smear Christians. 13. The Australia controversy. I listened to your interview on Australian television about the attempt to deny you a visitor's visa. I am not in agreement with blocking entry into countries on the basis of controversial opinions, but I looked up stories in the Australian media to get a sense of what people there are upset about. And one of these things is a remark you made in your episode about Hitler, about Nazi medical experimentation on twins. Quote, "They experimented on twins. I mean, some of the stories, by the way, sound completely absurd. You know, the idea that they just cut a human up and then sewed them back together. Why would you do that? Literally, even if you're the most evil person in the world, that's a tremendous waste of time and supplies. Just slice a person in half and sew them together. That just sounds like bizarre propaganda." Dennis continues, "Australians are upset on behalf of one of their citizens, a Jewish woman around the age of 100, who was one of those twins. And the reason is their view that you minimise what was done to people like her. The description you offered of the type of experimentation, quote, just slice a person in half and sew them together, doesn't reflect any Nazi experiment I've ever read or heard about. It sounds like a cartoon version, but it's not far off from reality. You can find descriptions of what was done to people like that, Australian women, on the Wikipedia Nazi human experimentation page. it sounds pretty close to what you mocked. From about September 1942 to about December 1943, experiments were conducted at the Ravensbrück concentration camp for the benefit of the German armed forces to study bone, muscle, and nerve regeneration and bone transplantation from one person to another. In these experiments, subjects had their bones, muscles, and nerve removed without anesthesia. As a result of these operations, many victims suffered intense agony, mutilation, and permanent disability. Specifically with regard to the twins, the experiments including amputating healthy limbs, deliberately infecting them with diseases such as typhus, blood transfusions from one twin to the other, and sewing twins together to create conjoined twins. Is that bizarre propaganda? Candace? You continue, but let's just go with it. Let's just say that that's actually true, that experimentation is the thing that sets the Nazis apart. Then why did we bring them all over here? I wonder why we did that. Maybe for a little more experimentation? Have you heard of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb? Have you ever heard of the CIA? If you think experimentation is unique to Nazis, you need to wake up. Dennis responds, a couple of things. First, if you read the Operation Paperclip Wikipedia page, you'll find that the scientists we brought over after the war were nearly all in various aspects of rocketry, aviation, geophysics, and chemical and biological warfare. Truman's primary motive in approving the operation was to keep these scientists out of the hands of Stalin and the Soviet Union, which is where they likely would have ended up if we had left them in Europe. Secondly, no one was brought over who was to our knowledge involved in Nazi experimentation or on human beings. None of Mengeler's doctors who conducted horrific medical experimentation on prisoners in the camps. Only one paperclip scientist was ever charged with committing a war crime, and he was returned to Germany for trial, where he was acquitted. Has America done similar bad things? As your reading from the book Chaos indicates, the answer is yes. Would you say that puts morally America on par with Nazi Germany? We should know about and reckon what we've done. It doesn't begin to compare in volume or systemization to what the Nazis did. While I'm on World War II, I just want to note my bafflement at another charge you made in the same episode, number 17, citing the BBC documentary The Savage Peace, which taught you say, that we, meaning the World War II allies, committed terrible atrocities and ethnic cleansing of German-speaking people after the war, resulting in the ethnic cleansing from the region of approximately 12 million Germans and the killing of 500,000 of them. Are you not aware that those acts were committed by the Soviets in the Eastern European zone they occupied? That the British, Americans, and other allies had no presence or power to determine what happened in the areas under Soviet occupation? It's this kind of conflation, using facts but making unwarranted leaps, that has upset so many people, myself included. And I think that last line, I'm just going to read that to you again, because this gets to the heart of it. It's this kind of conflation, using facts but making unwarranted leaps, that has upset so many people, myself included. Final thoughts, Dennis says. You may not consciously intend to engender hatred of Israel and Jews, but that doesn't really matter. The fact is you are doing so. Whatever your motives, I cannot think of anyone in public life engendering as much suspicion of Jews, Zionism, and Israel as are you. All of my life I've tried to teach people that motives rarely matter. Actions matter. Communists killed 100 million people and enslaved and ruined the lives of more than 1 billion. Yet many communists and their supporters had good motives. It turns out that the amount of evil done by people with good motives is far greater than the amount of evil committed by people with evil motives. I suspect that few people wake up in the morning planning to do what they consider evil. So I don't impugn your motives. I don't even judge them. But to my shock, and that of every Jew and Christian in my life, our once adored Candace has done great harm to Jews, whether intentionally or not. He says, let me offer my own life and work as an example of the opposite. I've worked all my life to bring Jews and Christians together, in particular as a prominent Jew trusted by many Jews. I've constantly defended Christians. For example, I've explained to Jews that America's Christians should never be lumped in with Europe's Christians. The terrible treatment of Jews in Europe has nothing to do with America's Christians. In addition, I have not talked about the Catholic Church's pedophilia scandals, nor have I blamed Pope Pius XII for not publicly speaking out against the Nazi genocide against the Jews of Europe. I wanted my millions of non-Catholic listeners to concentrate on all the good Catholics they know in their lives. I devoted hours to attacking the Los Angeles Dodgers for honouring, not merely allowing them to perform, but honouring nuns in drag known as the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence in Dodger Stadium before a game. I have had Bill Donahue, the longtime president of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, the premier American defender of Catholics and Catholicism, on my radio show many times. We became so close, he asked me to write a blurb for one of his books. On the Catholic League's website, he wrote, and it is still there. I've known Dennis Prager for decades. He's not only a friend, he's one of the most brilliant logical thinkers of our time. Proud of his heritage, he is not at all ethnocentric. In fact, he wants to reach a wide audience, sharing with Catholics, for example, many of the same values. It would be more accurate to say values that practicing Catholics share with observant Jews. I probably talked about the massacres of black Christians in West Africa more than any non-Christian talk show host in America, and probably more than many Christian talk show hosts. In sum, over the past 40 years, I might well have been the greatest non-Christian defender of Christians and Christianity in America. I also believe that I have probably brought more American non-Jews back to church than any living Christian. You could have done something similar for Jews in Israel, and for Jewish Catholic-Christian relations. You've chosen to do the opposite. For example, on August 17th, you tweeted, "Today marks 109 years since a 13-year-old Catholic little girl named Mary Fagan was ruthlessly raped and murdered by a wealthy power pedophile named Leo Frank, the president of the local B'nai B'rith chapter. Christians, let's make her story viral." Now, why exactly did you mention that Frank was president of local B'nai B'rith chapter? And why exactly are you calling on Christians to make her story viral? The logical conclusion is that both were noted to foster Christian anger at Jews. By the way, before I continue, Candace, because I've seen her do this many times, would look at that and, "Boy, could you say, how could you say that? I'm just trying to publicize a terrible crime." And she'd deny. But let's watch Dennis, how he clearly makes the case that this must be the logical conclusion of her intent. Because he says, "Imagine if I had tweeted on August 17th, today, August 17th, marks 349 years since the death of Bogdan Chmelnicki, the greatest murderer of Jews prior to Hitler. A devout Christian directed the slaughter of more than 300,000, mostly Ukrainian Jews, many in the most horrific ways. Jews, let's make their story viral." Would anyone assume that there was any purpose other than to foment Jewish animosity toward Christians with such a tweet? I've waited a long time, probably too long, to send this letter, but I wanted to be sure that I had my facts straight, and I was also hoping that I would hear you say things, indeed anything, that would make writing this letter unnecessary. I need you to understand why even I, a long-time friend whom you have often said you admire, have concluded that you are harming Jews and Israel. Let me just say that I understand your qualms about the post-October 7th situation in Israel and Gaza. I understand you're deeply disturbed by the innocents, particularly children, who have been killed, wounded, and displaced since the war began. I am too, as is everyone I know. You and I apparently differ, however, about who is morally responsible for the disaster this has become for all involved. For some reason, you're preoccupied with Jews, and in a very dark way. One compelling proof of that darkness are the comments on your X feed and on YouTube anytime you talk about Jews. Many hundreds, probably thousands of comments are clearly anti-Semitic. In the views of these despicable people, you are a kindred spirit. That is not insignificant. Let me share a personal anecdote. A couple years ago, I asked Julie Hartman, a young woman with whom I do a weekly podcast, to look through as many emails sent to me through my website as possible. I often do not see them for weeks, so there were at least 1,000 emails for her to peruse. After about 2 weeks, she made an important observation. There wasn't one racist or otherwise bigoted email in the 1,000 she read. The left routinely accuses me of racism, xenophobia, misogyny, homophobia, etc. Yet not one email expressed any of those. You would think that given my outspoken opposition to affirmative action, for example, I would elicit a fair number of emails from racists. Not one. You would think that given my ongoing opposition to same-sex marriage, I'd receive a fair amount of gay-hating emails. Again, not one. That there are a vast number of outright Jew-hating comments on your podcast is not a good sign. All of us can be measured in part by the people we draw into our lives. If you do not mean to hurt Jews, that should seriously trouble you. At the very least, I would think you would speak out against such sentiments, forthrightly declaring that you are not interested in anyone following you who is anti-Jew. Racists know they have no ally in me. Anti-Semites don't know that about you. Do I think you have become an anti-Semite? If the only definition of an anti-Semite is a person who hates all Jews, you are surely not. But that has never been the only definition of an anti-Semite. If it were, almost no enemy of the Jews, in the Jews' nearly 4,000-year history, other than Hitler and his most fanatical Jew-hating followers, were anti-Semites. I strongly suspect that, unlike Nick Fuentes, for example, you do not consider yourself an anti-Semite. But if the term defines an individual who isolates Jews and or the Jewish state and is having a particular and malign influence in the world, the term would apply. Since you are an avid reader, I highly recommend Robert Spencer's The Truth About Antisemitism. Finally, I've gathered from all your comments over many podcasts, discussions and interviews that you believe there is one standard for Israel and another for everyone else. In my opinion, there are many more facts that refute that view than there are that support it. But like the less view of America, it's easy to believe if you sift out the good and focus on the bad. The more one does that, the more skewed the picture comes into focus. I implore you not to do that. In your final Daily Wire podcast, you expressed an interest in having Rabbi Barclay or any other of your critics arrange for you to go to Israel and Gaza, to speak to people there and report on what you find. If you're still interested, I'm offering to go with you to Israel to do just that. Obviously, I could not go into Gaza, even if such a thing were possible, but I can certainly talk to people who could make it happen if it is possible, though I admit to some trepidation about the risk to a young American mother of young children. Candace, this is one of the most difficult letters I've ever written. After you read this, I'm open to dialoguing with you privately or publicly. May I ask that you confirm that you have received this letter? Dennis. Dennis has moral clarity. Extremely powerful stuff. He goes through what she says, and as I say, it's sad that not only does Candace say things that are so hurtful and damaging and full of lies, but then she seems oblivious to them and denies that that is the impact it's having. So, Dennis, it must have been very difficult as someone who did quite a bit to empower Candace and platform her and to see this happening, but he's had the courage to speak out and make this point. I really like the fact that he tries to be polite, to have private discussion. He's waited a very long time. He's not looking to cancel people. He's looking to continue the conversation, to bring her. He's trying to be constructive. He's not looking to name call and silence. And that's always been his approach because he is secure and confident in what he knows to be true. Now, there are people out there, there's media organizations, there's individuals, as we're seeing, that are spouting false narratives, lies about Israel, about the Jewish people, about Judaism, and that's what makes the work of JTV so important. If you've been watching this video, if you've come to the end of this video, if you appreciate what we're doing, I'd like you to consider something. We're growing a lot, we're getting seen by a lot of people, but we could do so much more to reach even more people and share with them new transformational associations of Jews, Judaism, and Israel. But the way I think we do that is by scaling. Let's have more presenters on board. Let's do more documentary content, animated content, supplementary content. Just really expand the content we're doing so we can compete with much more serious and bigger media organizations. To do that, we're going to need funds. So what I'm planning to do is having one fundraising day. And if you'd consider taking a small page on this fundraising page and reaching out to your network and seeing if they'll chip in, I'd be so grateful. We've already had people signing up saying they'll do it. If you'd be willing to partner with us in spreading the truth, in doing this small but powerful commitment, please click on the Google form in the link below this video where you can literally just put in a few contact details and I'll reach out to you in the coming days where I explain to you what the process will be. As I say, very small commitment, but very powerful impact. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.